All right, so let's get started. Welcome and thank you to everyone who's joining us for our virtual forum tonight, featuring a discussion on the major snow event that gripped the region 10 years ago, Snowmageddon. My name is Nicole Zolas, and I'm the Archivist Supervisor at the Lambton County Archives, which is located near Wyoming. I'm pleased to be here tonight to moderate this discussion and introduce our speakers for the evening. So the snow emergency began December 12th, 2010, and saw an estimated 1,500 people stranded along Highway 402 and area roadways in snow squall conditions that did not subside until the morning of December 14th. Over the course of the event, residents were rescued by snowmobile, bus, and even Canadian military helicopters. In total, all of the stranded were found to be safe. Approximately 700 of the rescued were housed at one of 10 local emergency shelters. Still, an equal number is estimated to have been sheltered and fed by generous Lambton County residents. Most of our panelists tonight will be discussing the event through the lens of recollection, since all have either assumed new roles within the last 10 years or retired. Panelists include Steve Beattie, who was a regional field officer for Emergency Management Ontario, Chris Martin, who's with the Lambton OPP, Jennifer Turk, who was the Emergency Management Coordinator for Plimpton, Wyoming, Fred Wessels, who was an inspector with the Lambton OPP and officer in command, Mark Wettering, who was the County of Lambton Emergency Management Coordinator, and potentially a bit later, Lauren Swift, who was the fire chief with the Petrolia Fire Department. Now I'd like to introduce Warden Weber to open the virtual forum.
Thank you for that. On behalf of the County of Lambton, it's a pleasure to welcome everyone here to this evening, this virtual community forum. A great opportunity to reminisce what an event that will be etched in the memories of those that participated for the rest of their lives. I'm sure it was quite an experience, and I have heard some of the stories and some of the concerns, so it'll be great to get caught up on those and have them permanent record in our archives for the County of Lambton. So a very historic event in our community. A great opportunity to remind ourselves of being prepared. We never know, we're coming to the season that we never know when a storm will come and hit us. The winds come off of our lake here and can be quite severe at times. So we need to remind ourselves to be prepared for something like this again. It also reminds us of what a great community we have in the County of Lambton that is able to come together, and the volunteers that come out, and the goodness of people that will shine through in something like this. So to be able to remember that and to put that into our archives is certainly a great opportunity. So I want to thank the staff at the County of Lambton and the archives that are putting this together so that it can be recorded. This is an ongoing campaign that I believe will receive information or photos or stories going forward and be able to include that. So just on behalf of the County of Lambton, I want to thank everyone for participating here tonight. For those that lived through this, thank you for bringing back those memories and recording it for the future. So thank you on behalf of the county.
Thank you, Warden Weber. If this is your first time participating in a Zoom presentation, I would like to share some things with you. So you can use the chat box to socialize with other people or to make comments. Just make sure you select all attendees if you want to share your message with everyone and not just the panelists. If you have any technical questions for me about how to use Zoom, you can always send a message to me in the chat box as well. If you have questions throughout the presentation for our panelists, please put them in the Q&A section or the chat, and we'll be presenting them to the panelists during the question period that will follow the discussion. So now to our discussion. Environment Canada issued a snow squall watch for Lambton County the morning of Sunday, December 12th, and upgraded that to a snow squall warning early in the evening. The first reports of Highway 402 closures began coming in early Monday morning on December 13th. So panelists, when did you first anticipate that this was no ordinary snow squall and that there might be some trouble? Who wants to start?
Okay, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Fred.
I think when we started to get multiple collisions on Highway 402, at the time, the government of the day was very serious about keeping the highway open and not closing it ahead of time due to the commerce that passed along the highway. At the time, there was an estimate about $10 million an hour in losses for the blockage or the closure of the highway. So we started to have multiple collisions, and I believe late in the afternoon of that day, in the area of the Lambton Middlesex County line was sort of the last major collision, jackknife trailers, etc., that finally worked towards closing the highway for good. So we knew we were starting to get in trouble then.
I knew it was going to be really bad when Fred called me up and said, Mark, I think it's time for the county to declare an emergency. And there must have been a pause on my end, or I might have said, okay. And Fred says, well, this is what you've been training for all these years. So yeah, that was our first, well, not the first inkling. Jennifer and I had been working together that day for several hours already. We had heard about Warwick starting to experience some passengers being brought into their community center, and Jennifer was dealing with a large number of people coming in from 402 and Reese's Corners OPP, and we're bringing people in. So that's how I guess I kind of got involved. I asked Jennifer, if you need some help, I'm available. I can walk to your office because I live in Wyoming. So that's how we start up. And then once the information started coming in over the course of several hours, and Fred began communicating the scope of the event, and we knew it was going to be bad. Obviously, you know, we start closing the highway, but I think the scale was kind of unknown until we started getting details from Fred, and then it was like, yeah, this is unprecedented.
Yeah, I agree. Mark and I had already been conversing that day, and I think what started it for me was the weather watch that we had about a snow squall watch with north winds. And anytime I've ever seen a weather warning with direct north winds, that usually means that we're gonna get dumped on at some point in time. And usually that means more than just the regular 5 to 10 or 10 to 15 centimeters of snow. So I remember going to work on the Monday, and I made it, I walked because you just had a gut feeling that the parking lot was probably not going to be accessible come the end of the day because it was going to have lots of snow. And thankfully, I only lived 2 blocks from the municipal office in Plimpton, Wyoming, and thankfully my daycare provider was only 3 blocks away. So I had everything lined up, and I had gotten a phone call at the office from former Deputy Fire Chief Kim O'Brien, who was also the CEMC alternate at that time. And he had told me that there was vehicles stranded on Michigan line. And I couldn't understand why we'd have vehicles on Michigan line when we had the 402 and London line, but then it became clear to me that, well, it's because of all the accidents that are going on. And Chris, we've talked about this with the emergency detour route. When the 402 is out of commission, then that becomes highway or London line. And for Plimpton, Wyoming at that time, when those 2 roads become out, then it's Confederation line or even Michigan line, because those are the 2 roads that go right into Sarnia. So yeah, when I got that call about Michigan line and people were stranded, I thought, oh boy, this is just the beginning.
So we had concerns, Fred had concerns, and we as a detachment had concerns. And by noon on the Monday, Fred had actually reached out to regional headquarters and requested further additional logistics, support from personnel, snowmobiles, pickup trucks. We knew just by the way the wind direction and the way that things had rapidly escalated up through the weather notifications from a special advisory to a watch, and then all of a sudden a snow squall. And then they kept talking about long-term winds sustained. And Fred already mentioned it, but it was like it kind of started between Mandamin and Forest and then slowly started to move easterly, but building in its width. And as it did so, it just created more havoc on Highway 402. And then, as Jennifer alluded to, people started to use the side roads. They started to try to find alternate routes. They were backing up off of the 402, trying to get off on ramps, and creating just more and more logistical problems. And it just continued to move easterly into Middlesex County. And that was Monday afternoon early, when it just started to grow and expand. And we knew we were in for a rough few days at that point.
It was interesting how it progressed. I mean, from an outside view, because we weren't on the ground, obviously, but we'd get information about Warwick has received half a dozen people, and in Watford there's another dozen, and it just kept on trickling in for hours and build to a crescendo kind of thing. And it was kind of a slow burn, if you will. I mean, and that's where I guess it wouldn't really hit is when we got the Gotten and with Jennifer and her people at Plimpton, Wyoming there. Jennifer remembers this, just people after people arriving in town and getting information back about the truck stop at Reese's Corners, the Tim Hortons at Reese's Corners, filling to capacity and busing people or driving people into Wyoming. It was just, yeah. And then we had other situations going on as well. Jennifer, you remember the Petrolia water system, the booster station on Confederation. Yeah. Something had tripped in the network, and all they needed was someone to get to the booster plant to kind of flip some switches, but they couldn't get anyone there. Yeah. So then trying to get someone from their public works to the booster station, that that was something in the middle of all this going on. Oh no, now we've got a water emergency, which it didn't turn out to be, obviously. But and then the East Lambton water supply system, there was someone on London Line at the end of the system, and they were reporting being without water. So then we were in contact with Laws to see, is this a greater concern? Yeah.
Yeah, it did quite balloon. I also remember, and I didn't find out about this until it was the Tuesday after, but we had people out in Blue Point that were without power since the Sunday. And unfortunately, Hydro One couldn't get to them until they had a way to get there. And they didn't have equipment at the time to get there. So we ended up giving them a plow assist to get to their station in order to put the hydro back on.
So what were some of the variables responders and emergency management personnel needed to consider when motorists began to find themselves stranded?
Well, I can certainly start for myself. We always hit the message home to be prepared. And unfortunately, in this situation, there was quite a few motorists that were stranded that just weren't prepared by means of proper clothing to endure the cold temperatures for evacuation, or medically by means of prescriptions to accommodate for their medical conditions. For example, we had an individual that was a diabetic, but they didn't have medication with them. because they were simply going from London to Flint and then flying from Flint to their home in Florida for the winter. And some of the other things that I was, I guess, shocked that some of the motorists that didn't have was like winter emergency kits in their vehicles, by means like to make sure they have enough fuel if they're stranded, blanket, a snow brush, as well as the responders and emergency management personnel had to quickly think of where these stranded motorists were to be taken. If the stranded motorists didn't already evacuate their vehicle themselves and walk to a nearest home. Because Plimpton, Wyoming was encased in their own snow globe at that time, no one could get to the reception centers due to road conditions, meaning Canadian Red Cross, who was Plimpton, Wyoming's community volunteers to open up the reception centers, they couldn't come in. So it seemed that any outside agencies that Plimpton, Wyoming had that needed to come in, they weren't able to come in because of the road conditions. So for myself, that ended up meaning, because I grew up in Wyoming, I ended up pushing the plan basically aside, and I started contacting those that I knew that lived in Wyoming that would contribute as a volunteer to supervise the shelters in the center so that stranded motorists had a warm place to go.
Jennifer, and I want on your point there, something I wanted to say too, as a commanding officer overseeing all this, was that people such as yourself didn't say we can't, they said, how can we? And that was a huge thing throughout the whole event, from emergency service personnel to municipal personnel to the public in general, is if they heard somebody was stranded out on a side road, they didn't say, well, we can't get to them. They tried to figure out how they could go about and in doing that. So a very excellent point on where you had to think outside the box. You know, I mean, this is an issue that's confronted me. How can we think outside the box? And I guess I kind of want to use that as a segue to everybody, you know, has talked about the military and the helicopters, etc. And I'll go over it quickly as I can how that came about. I had traveled home to my residence to try and grab a little shut-eye, and my phone rang. And if my phone rings at home after work and it's work, Chris could tell you that means that things aren't going too well at work. So anyhow, into the local office here in Forest I went, because it was going to be impossible to reach Petrolia, which is our headquarters. So I had communication with the supervisors on the road saying that it was becoming impossible, or was impossible, for them to check on motorists. One of the first things I did was contact an individual who I continue to talk about all this assistance and his members and friends gave to this day. Was I contacted Brad Goodhill, who was a fire chief of Warwick Township at the time, or the Warwick Station. I'm not sure it was all one big fire department at the time or not. And I believe Brad was also a member of the Warwick Snowmobile Club. And we were also lucky at the time, and Brad could correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we had an emergency access as well to the 402 at that time, right at 22 highway overpass, because they were doing some construction on the road at that time. So with one simple call to Brad, again, another individual that said, well, we can't. It was, how can we? And we will. Brad mustered up some of his fire department members who had sleds, so snowmobile sleds, began to check on motorists for us. And then the next thing I hear from Brad or a member there is that we're now making sandwiches and that for the motorists. So it just goes to show you the community pride. So then I was kind of put in my lap is how, again, can we think outside the box to get access to these motorists? So knowing that we were taxed at the time for snowmobiles, our OPP snowmobiles, at the time, we didn't have any snowmobiles in Lambton County because I know it's easy to say now, but we never got enough snow to justify them. We had quad runners, which were used for this event, of course. So I thought, what about helicopters? What about the military? And they'd never been used before, but upon one single call to our general headquarters in Aurelia, who has a duty officer on 24/7, I spoke with him, and the next thing I knew, I was getting a call from CFB Trenton, Ontario, which is the rescue squadron. We went through some Q&As together, and they decided to send up a Hercules plane. And what their agenda was going to be was to drop some flares from the plane, not unlike they do for a missing boater over Lake Huron or Lake Erie, to give some visibility to see just what we had down there. We didn't know what we had because, of course, you couldn't see your hand in front of you. So they didn't know we didn't know how many cars, how many people, etc., are out there. So it was left at that with the conversation. It wasn't probably 45 minutes later, I got a call back from CFB Trenton saying that the ceiling is so low, which means that their point of visibility was so bad from the Hercules because of the storm, it was useless to drop flares, etc. So they weren't going to be much help to us, but what they would continue to do is do runs to see if things would improve and to not talk all night long. Eventually it did clear up enough to where we got the Griffin helicopters coming in. And then it was up to our supervisors on the road, along with other emergency personnel, to set up points of landing for them so that we could muster the people from their vehicles, etc., to come in. Knowing in the meantime, we had awesome farmers out there who got in their large John Deere, Ford, whatever other, I don't want to slam any makes, case, what else is there out there? Tractors with the large snow blowers on them, and they started cutting routes around these vehicles and that, making more access. And we started getting calls from people saying, listen, and I think Nicole and I were talking Monday prior to this meeting tonight, saying that, there was people out there with 30 motorists in their homes, and they were feeding them, giving them tea, coffee. This is what extent residents were going to try and assist the people that needed help out there. So with that, I'll be quiet for a while and but that's more or less the military story. I'm unaware if they've been used prior to or since that time, but certainly they came in very handy. And these are people that train and train and train and train and look for that time to go out and actually use that training. So there was some very good video. In fact, I think CNN News even did a story on the military coming and rescuing that. And I think there was also a question about how the terminology Snowmageddon got going in the first place. I think that was the media. I really do, Warden. I think it was the media that had to, you want that sound bite at the first of the media or on the front page, across the front page. I think it was the media that coined that phrase.
Some of the other variables, in addition to what Inspector Wessels has mentioned, was the overwhelming number of calls that our Provincial Communications Center received in London. And in that first 24 hours, there was almost 3,000 calls for service in Lambton and Middlesex counties alone. And so that's in and above what the normal calls per day would be received by the Provincial Communications Center. So they were swamped with calls. They were not able to keep ahead of the calls. There was duplicate calls, and in some case there was triplicate calls. And so you're trying to sort through the information from people that are passersby, from the people that are actually in their vehicles and stranded, and the other information from other callers. And so as you're sorting through that information, it becomes information overload, and it becomes more and more difficult to manage it. One of the issues that we had, what I would say is probably one of the bigger variables at the front end was that we simply weren't able to get officers out on the road and in a position to respond because they were experiencing the exact same issues that everybody else was. In fact, we ended up with, I think Fred might know better, but I think at least 5 or 6 cruisers that were buried in snow in various locations throughout Plimpton, Wyoming, Warwick. And we had to resort to the Warwick Snowmobile Club. We had to resort to fire, and we had to resort to tow truck companies and other people to be able to help us to get our officers back on the road and back into the office at some point in time, because at the early on stages, we realized that we simply weren't able to respond as effectively as we wanted to. We were handicapped by the sheer volume of the issue, and had to resort to pulling officers off of the road in the interest of their safety as well. So at that front end of the event, and I saw some comments as well about, you know, the shifting of the squall, or squalls as you would call it. But the one common denominator, no matter if it shifted to the east or shifted to the west, it never ever left Plimpton, Wyoming. It never ever left Warwick, and then it would shift more to the east. But that the greater of that snow event was the 90 centimeters of snow that was recorded at Reese's Corners.
That's how Environment Canada described the squall, was essentially a conveyor belt of snow. As you mentioned, Chris, I mean, the squalls generally tend to move around a little weekend, whereas this thing just kept on dumping snow for, you know, from Sunday night all through till Tuesday morning kind of thing. Just to kind of expand on what Fred was saying, obviously as OPP commander, he has the authority to request assistance from the province and the federal government, being the military. The county didn't specifically ask for military assistance. The county declared an emergency in support of the OPP's response, and also opened up the county's ability to obtain external resources if necessary from the province, who could then potentially attain resources from other municipalities or other agencies, that kind of thing. But declaring the emergency obviously recognized the severity of the event. And it also, as Jennifer mentioned, her calling out volunteers to help at reception centers or emergency shelters. The declaration of emergency that was essentially a blanket for the entire area that was affected would cover those volunteers for liability for the municipality and for the county. So actions that were being taken were certainly beyond standard response from the county level and the municipal level. So the declaration of emergency partially would cover us from legal liability potentially for what actions are taken. One interest, well, it's kind of a funny side story. Of course, the route from Reese's Corners to Wyoming to the emergency shelters was extremely important to keep open, which Fred would have instilled in that to us during that Monday evening. But the cars that had been installed were in the ditches, on the shoulders, and the road. But it's very important to keep that essential lifeline open to Wyoming. So at one point, I was speaking to one of the county roads operators, and I don't know if I should mention names, but Jim, who'd been with the county for a long time, I got him on the radio and told him the importance of keeping that roadway open. And he said, that's not a problem. We'll just bounce the cars out of the way. Granted, the vehicles had been searched to make sure they're empty by the OPP and the roads crews, but what they do is just build up a head of snow and gently push them out of the way. And as a matter of fact, there was only one damage claim at the end of the event, and that was a car at Reese's Corners, I think, because they had to wrap a chain around the rear axle and put it out of the way a bit. Bouncing the cars out of the way to keep that road open was not an issue.
just, if I can for a second, the mentioned about the squall, how it stayed in that location and moved a little bit, but it was always stationary, basically. As mayor of Lambton Shores, I was getting calls, and I know there was vehicles parked at the Legacy Center, transport trucks, and there was people there that were stranded. I was getting calls from CBC and asking me what the weather was like. I live up here in Grand Bend, and it was snowing a little bit, but there was nowhere near the severity that it was down there. And I know in the city of Sarnia, I think the same thing was that way, but it was really isolated but severe in such an area. And people were wondering why, whether I was going anyplace or what I was doing. And there was nothing that from where I was that I could do anything to help. But it was interesting how isolated and longevity of the squalls.
Warden, I can remember walking into the forest detachment in the middle of the night. I'm talking 1, 2 o'clock in the morning, and had to hold my hand over my mouth because I couldn't breathe if I didn't have some sort of buffer there. The wind was so strong coming in. I just reading some of the online comments here, I chuckle at one from Brad Goodhill, who was the fire chief at the time, states that approximately 2 a.m. in the morning, 2 OPP officers came in, asked to use the phone that they needed to call myself at the time, who they probably would have said the inspector. Brad said they got off the phone and said, he thinks he's going to get helicopters in here. And the other turned and laughed and said, yeah, good luck with that. And Brad said it wasn't a short time later he heard helicopters overhead. And the joke was on them. So they were able to come in. So that's something else I was thinking of as well. So into the cleanup, we were faced with a logistical nightmare of getting things cleaned up as well. From all these vehicles, owners had to be identified, where the vehicles were being taken to. We had to get road crews in. And from the OPP's perspective, or my perspective, what we did is we broke the area into grid patterns. And those snowmobiles from the OPP that came into, they were all parked at Middlesex County, and they were all given a grid. And our officers, or the officers on them sleds, went to every residence and checked every side road within the snowbound area. And I'm proud to say they did it all in approximately one morning time. So people knew the work that was going on behind the scenes. And there was another comment on here on how a lady was very afraid for her husband, who she knew was out in the 402, and heard that the OPP were not able to access people, and the fear that that put into them. I guess the only thing we can say is that people to this day have to realize that police officers, vehicles are typically the vehicle that's driven by the ordinary person. They're not any magical vehicle either, and can't go anywhere that a normal vehicle would go. And that's certainly something we ran into back then, that all the police cruisers are only two-wheel drive. So we're very susceptible to going off the road into ditches, etc., like the normal people's vehicle was. So very hard to access people. And like I said before, thank God for the willingness of fire departments, general public, and farmers, and that with our blessing and under our direction in most cases, because we had to know what was being checked and they had to report back to us. We got the job done. And I don't know if it's been said yet or not, but everybody went through this whole event without one person being injured as a direct result of the snow event. not one person was hospitalized or taken by, where yes, we had some, some slip and falls and that as a result of the snow, but you could have that in any snow event. But with the mess that was out there everywhere, not one single person died or was seriously injured as a result of it.
So with that said, what information was essential to get to those that were stranded, whether it was on the 402 or one of the other roadways?
Chris, or you need to answer?
I can take that. So, getting information to people was very problematic. In today's society, I think that just with the significant improvements on weather forecasting, the significant improvements in the uses and applications of social media through the various weather apps, through everything from Snapchat stories to Instagram and Facebook, it would have been so much easier to relay information, to prevent people from even going on the roads, or once they were on the roads, to providing them with way outs or stopping them, prior to the event. We encountered a significant amount, as Fred alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, of tourists that are from other countries, traveling from state to state through the province of Ontario, and with, obviously 4,000 or 5,000 trucks a day crossing into the US. So it was compounded, and we knew that. So dealing with media at that point in time was like snail mail is today. It was just slower. However, I know that George from the Fox FM, CHOK, we had Dave Rector, who was our media liaison officer. He had engaged all of the media, both print and news media. Radio media did a great job of relaying all of the information. And every single time there was a song that had ended or an advertisement, they did a great job. Fox FM did a great job of relaying what information they could to all of those stranded motorists, and they were a big help. Victim services from County of Lambton, and I believe from London Middlesex, were deployed to assist the Provincial Communications Center in contacting some of those people that had cell phones and giving them advice as to how to be able to make their stay in their car more safer, last longer, and just talk to people. So like Fred had said, and others have said, there was a number of other agencies that came together, despite the fact that we didn't have all of those social media tools that we have now, that were able to reach out and act as a resource to help people, to manage the incident, and to keep people safe.
That's very well said. So when it came to, we did kind of talk a little bit about this earlier, the decision to request support from the Canadian military. I'd like to learn a little bit more about the rescue operation that kind of ensued. If anyone has anything to share.
Well, I can start with that, and then I'll turn it over to Fred. And again, it was a multi-agency, be it private snowmobile club in Warwick, whether it was fire, whether it was Middlesex detachment, the resources that came from Aurelia. It was a huge response. But prior to really determining how vast or how big of a response, we took the time to kind of study some of what would now be called analytics. How many people were in the warming centers? How much information did we have about the actual number of vehicles, not only on the 402, the 402 was around 325, but on all of the secondary roads. And one of the things that we did was we took the time, once we established a plan, and we took a time to exactly assess what was out there. And for me, it was driving down the westbound 402 in the middle of the night, and doing it in eastbound, and weaving in and out of the cars. And there was another officer and myself, and cars were buried in, 8-foot, 10-foot drifts. Cars were abandoned. And it was almost apocalyptic in nature because there was just so many vehicles out there. And so what we did was, under Fred's direction, is we kind of established a little bit of a framework for an operational plan that involved, first off, assessing what lane was easier to open on the 402 to get things moving. And that was the eastbound lane. And the other thing that we were doing, as Jennifer can allude to, is we were also working on the emergency detour route being London line as well. And so every, public works county plow, secondary roads plows from Lambton Shores to St. Clair to Sarnia to all the way down to Don Euphemia, we're all helping in that operational plan and supporting us.
And Jen also posts herself eating her followers' fear foods in order to help.
I guess something I want to add just on the whole military thing is they had all the big and shiny toys and they were a great help, but it was Wyoming Fire Department, Warwick Fire Department, Lambton Shores Fire Department. Those people that didn't necessarily have all the shiny toys that did the heavy lifting, get people transported to the military, etc. So, like I said again, the military had the flashy stuff. They tended to be the video clips on the news station, but it was the fire departments and the residents and the farmers that did all the heavy lifting to assist in getting people there, along with our officers as well on on sleds. Like Brad said from Warwick, the 2 officers that came in to stop in for a coffee in the middle of the night there had been 2 hours getting from 81 highway to the Warwick fire hall in Warwick Village. So that's what they were up against. But so I just wanted to make that clear that yes, unique situation with the military, but I'll tell you, it was the fire departments, etc., that did all the heavy lifting.
Thank you, Fred. Steve, I'd like to hear a little bit from you. You came in a bit later in the conversation. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on the conversation so far. You're on mute. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
All right. There's some people I got to say hello to, which is pretty well everybody there. Nice to be contacted to participate. And I made some notes of my involvement and some of the things that happened that long night into the morning, and then also later on the next day. I was based out of Western OPP in London. We were able to get a lot of provincial agencies in there, and some of us, I had responsibility of contacting municipalities and seeing where they are. I believe I participated in at least one, if not 2, of Lambton County's teleconference meetings. And throughout, I updated the PEOC. Like, for example, military. I gave the forewarning that there was a request coming in, and that was not going to be an issue. They were thinking about just putting it in from the province anyways, and that's the way it's got to go. Municipality or agency within Ontario through the province, and the province has to request. Now, a problem with the military, and you may not be aware of it, and I'm not slamming them, I'm just letting you know. They were looking to send people from Pembroke. That is a long haul. I figured we might see them in 3 days. They eventually found some equipment that they could put on the highway and its track and use it for whatever reason, most cases to get people out. And they found some equipment in Trenton and in Toronto. But it wasn't, number one, but it would certainly do the job. So they were able to get some of them out, and I saw them the next day. In the provincial agencies that were there tried to work at the east end of the west end of the room, and I fortunately was sitting next to the MTO. The OPP would be getting calls from hospitals saying that they had ambulances going to hospitals and they wanted to have them escorted. Can they get plows? Blah, 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 blah. And some of the roads were not plowed from the hospital, sending hospital, to the highway. So manager and I think the first one was in Petrolia, and that went to London. We had the provincial tow trucks under contract, but they were close to the hospital. I made some other notes. We ended up being involved in transporting 2 other patients, both from Sarnia Hospital to London. And unfortunately, the last of those 3 patients was a gentleman that fell at the Tim Hortons on the road to Wyoming and hit his head on a concrete barrier for a car. And I do not know if he survived, but there were thoughts he might have been the fatality for the incident. And there again, some of the staff, because he had the radios there until, and some of the people working were questioning, do you really want us to go to the hospital and plow from the hospital to where we're supposed to be in the 402? And, no calm, no hesitation. Yeah, that's what you're doing. And we're paying, and if anybody's going to scream, they scream at me. So it worked out quite nice. Now, later, almost the last thing, I guess, we found out that the Air Force had brought up a plane from the East Coast that actually does search, not just for search and rescue, but it also searches for the bad people. And it has equipment on it, which allows them to see through the water to a degree, and also to very easily to go through snow to see if there's a car in there, see if there's some people in there. And I talked to people there and I said, to me, the best thing is take Highway 21 roughly from London, take it north, because we haven't been communicating with those people. 21 is usually a very bad road. And 100, it's usually blocked between Godrich and Port Elgin. And then actually there's another spot in Godrich which is usually blocked. And I said, probably there and in some of the side roads coming up to 21, that's where you might see some people that are stranded. And get that information back to the OPP, and then they can look to get it out to the appropriate area. So that was quite something. It was really something. In the beginning, and I don't think Warden Weber, you were the warden at the time, but right at the beginning, we understood that the OPP were bringing people to your lovely center in Strathroy-Caradoc. But the people there were the only ones that knew that's where OPP were bringing people. And eventually, they're getting kind of full in the area that people could be warm. And they had some chairs they could bring out to sit. They called their head office, municipal offices, and say, do you know what's happening here? And I believe Mark might have got involved to a degree in finding out where they might be able to put them and speaking to their emergency planning coordinator. But that was a communication thing. We've got to remember when we're communicating, it's got to be all around the block. You know, we can't leave people out. It's really important. And then there was the other thing with the warden that I personally worked with her on was her understanding that this was an emergency. Well, when you have schools closed, electricity in a broad area not available, people stranded, needing to be taken off highways by skidoo, by helicopters, by a bus, which was used at one time. You know, we're there and we've got people working extra hours. I said before this started, you know, I'd already put in my 8 hours. Now we're just working on double time. But, and as far as getting around, I wasn't doing too bad. And part of that was the vehicle I had. It was a GM Astro. It was pretty old and I had about 150,000 on it because I finally lost it when it was 190. But it was a high vehicle. I had 4-wheel drive that automatically kicked in. And the reason I say that, like I plowed snow in some of the communities I had to respond to, and where I would move a convoy of people. For example, in Durham, in our Durham, not the Durham, east of Toronto, they actually had me lead people that worked in Durham, and I went with them, took them over into the next community where they lived. So, but there's a few times I had to stop and open the door and see which side of the road I was on. You know, was the ditch next to me or was it on the other side of me? And unfortunately, I had to do that a couple of times. And but there was no oncoming traffic. And by the next morning, the roads were great, really good for travel. So that really worked out. I know that a lot of your citizens took some pictures, excellent pictures. But she had some fantastic pictures. I guess on the road where the municipal offices were, the Public Works found this huge hill of snow. And they thought it was kind of odd. And they were really careful with it in moving it. And it was a good thing they did. Apparently there was 1 or 2 cars under there, but you couldn't have identified them until the snow was taken off. And it was a huge amount. So quite interesting. She had a picture of that too.
Now we are winding down a little bit, and I do have one more question that I would like to pose to all of our panelists here today. Sorry to cut you off, Steve, with your very interesting conversation. But I do want to ask everyone before we go in the last few minutes, what about this event stood out the most to you? I'd love to know from everyone.
Oh, sorry, Mark.
Go ahead.
My other role at the time was administrative assistant within Plimpton, Wyoming. And I never gave any thought to this because of the amount of snow and the winds and everything that we were dealing with. But I remember a gentleman coming to the door on the 3rd day, and I thought, oh, wonder what he's doing here. And there was only 3 of us in the office that could make it to the office. So I went to the door to let him in. He was in to pay his water bill because his water sewer bill was due the 16th and this was the 15th. What stood out to me the most was, yeah, business continuity is very important, and it doesn't matter that there's an emergency on. You still have to keep the world moving forward, and you still have businesses that still need to run and things still need to function. Even in today with COVID-19 pandemic, businesses still need to function. People still need to go to work. So yeah, that's one thing that has very much stood out at me that that I didn't think of at the time. maybe a lesson learned that's come out of it for myself going forward.
Business continuity is very important. We had, there was a winter emergency of flooding in Durham. I was up there at their municipal offices when this elderly lady came in with her cash and she was going to be paying her taxes. And no, she wasn't walking away. She wanted to pay the taxes and make sure she got the signatures that she had paid. And business continuity. And that's not just, we've pushed it for years prior to the year 2000, in case something might have happened in 2000. But more and more industry are working on it. One of our colleagues that used to be with us, I know she's working with Rogers out in Western Canada to have a continuity plan. And to verify the other plans that they have throughout Canada. So, because during the big emergency, they had put generators on some of their towers to keep them going, and then people would come along and steal the generators. So then the next method was, okay, we take all the tires off the generator so nobody can drag them, at least we hope. So
Thank
I
you.
got too many stories. I'll shut up.
Mark, you're about to say something as well.
I was just going to say what struck me at the end was when we found out exactly how the community also provided assistance to people who are stranded along the roadways. We know exactly how many cars were stranded and on the 402 and how many people ended up in reception centers, but we really don't have any idea how many people actually ended up staying in homes of people who lived along the local roadways. We don't know how many people got food from people's homes. That, we've heard stories about people making sandwiches and things in their homes and taking them to people that were stranded in vehicles outside their homes that didn't necessarily want to come into their homes. But just that outpouring of community support was pretty amazing. And it's already been alluded to, the municipalities that provided the assistance. Petrolia, for example, they opened up shelters once the shelters in Wyoming began filling up. Petrolia opened up shelters. Cal Gardner, who is my counterpart in the city, he arranged and brought out, I believe, 200 cots, 100 for Petrolia and 100 for Wyoming on the Tuesday evening. And what really to this day still surprised me is how quickly the incident wrapped up once the roadways got open, and that's a testament to the OPP's abilities. We were expecting Wednesday night to be another full night with people in the shelters, but once the roadways got cleared and the OPP organized the repatriation of people with their vehicles, it just went amazingly smoothly and well. And by 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, I think everyone was back on the road. The shelters were closed. And that's what stands out to me, is that community support, that municipal support, and everyone working together to make this event turn out as well as it did. There was lots of potential for things to go very badly, and with everyone working together, it was pretty amazing.
Thank you, Mark. Chris, do you have what stood out the most to you?
Well, I agree with that comment. I mean, we as the detachment at the time had, worked closely with MTO, right from 9/11 in 2000 on a lot of management issues with respect to the 402. The 402 at times can be a very, very dangerous and unpredictable road. And a lot of that is because on any given night in the wintertime, you can be driving along in perfectly clear conditions and just hit that wall of snow. So what stands out to me is that, we'd worked through so many different scenarios before, as the detachment, and dealt with many, many unique issues with the 402, from QN crashes to other types of snowstorms. But this storm was by far the biggest and by far the best managed. And it could have been really nasty in so many different ways. But to have that many cars stranded that many people, the community rallying around it. It's just amazing that at the end of the day, and I saw one comment about the Tim Hortons at Reese's Corners, where people were in there for 3 days, and they were. But the things that people did was, why it ended as successfully as it did. That's clearly what stands out to me, is that as bad of a public safety issue as it was managed, and all of the involved people were the key to the success of the whole thing. By far, though, 3 times, 4 times worse than anything we'd ever experienced as far as snow squalls in Lambton County.
Thank you, Chris. Fred, what stands out the most to you?
I'm just going to echo what Chris said and add a couple things of some improvements that have taken place since that time as a result of the storm. One, that swing gates have been installed now for emergency closures on Highway 402. We'd asked and asked and asked for them, and it always takes a major emergency, etc., to get the province to move, right, Steve? It always takes something like that to get. And number 2 is they have planted evergreens along the north side of 402, especially in open areas, which once they mature will help as a natural wind block someday. And there has been some electronic signage put up on 402 as well. Some of that's is more in relation to 911 and the present environment we're in, but some of it as well was a result of that. So sometimes out of tragedy does come some good, and sometimes it takes that to get the province to move on things. Chris will tell you, I always fought for recognition of the 402 from the province, and it took things like 911, et cetera, with truck backups of 30 plus kilometers and that from the finally recognize, hey, there is another 4-lane highway that goes across the border up that way. And they certainly, and that's another thing that wasn't mentioned, was that all border traffic was stopped on the American side. No commercial traffic was allowed across upon our order, so that there wouldn't be even more backups across. But so, yeah, that's it.
Thank you, Fred. Steve, do you have any final comments to add? What stands out most to you? And then, oh, you're on mute.
I think it was a learning experience for a lot of us. And we took back from some of the big things that were needed to be looked at. And I believe some of the communities within Lambton County actually looked at purchasing beds and some blankets that they would actually have in their municipal offices. Now, Jennifer, I don't know if I'm correct, and she's nodding her head, yeah. So, and I know that Mark was in contact with Bettina Weber in Middlesex County, and that she would be, as long as they could get there. They had, actually, they have 2 trailers now, if not 3, where they're, what's that?
They have 3 now.
Oh, okay.
Mhm.
And she's doing really well with them. And they're an excellent tool and full with some of the stuff that you're really going to need. So that's a good thing, really good. Other than that, I get along with the Provincial Emergency Ops Center. I say, this is what's happening. This is what we're doing. And well, we don't, well, you should be, what are you doing? Goodbye. We're doing okay. Thank you. You know.
Thank you, Steve. Warden, would you like to add anything else from your perspective?
Not a lot to add, but I guess there's has been a lot of lessons learned from this, and a lot of good come out of it. I know as we do our local yearly emergency plan updates and revisions, Snowmageddon is something that always gets talked about, and how again, it goes back to what the community and the local people do when there's a situation, how they come together and help others. And that's truly something that rural Ontario is known for, and certainly evident here with whether it's the snowmobile clubs or everybody that come out and helped, and people that allowed people into their homes and fed them. So kudos to the residents of Lambton County that helped through this, and long live the memories, and we continue to learn from that. And I'm very pleased in the discussions tonight and how this is going to contribute to our archives. So thank you.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for all of our panelists tonight for sharing your time and your insight with us. It's truly appreciated. We've had some great comments from the public. So thank you everyone who joined in and viewed and shared and liked all of the discussion. Fun little photo to end the discussion, a lovely little puppy that was part of one of the submissions that came in this week, enjoying the snow. So with that being said, we are a few minutes over. So again, I truly appreciate everyone coming tonight. We will be sharing this. It is recorded, so we will be sharing this on our Facebook page and also placing it on our website. If you know anyone who couldn't come and make it to the viewing tonight, you can view it later. And again, submissions are still open until December 4th. If you go to lambtonarchives.ca and click on the Snowmageddon submissions, you can submit your own story or photos on there. And we'll definitely be continuing to keep track of everyone's comments on social media and hopefully continue this story and continue growing this story and capturing this story for generations to come. So thank you everyone tonight, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Yeah. Question for you, Nicole.
Sure.
Would you like me to send you via email copy of my notes?
Yeah,
I
that
will
would be
type them so you can read them. So no problem.
be appreciated. Thank you, Steve.
Retirement's nice.
All right, everyone, have a great night.
You too.
Bye-bye.
And Mark
You too.
and Jennifer. Hey, hello.
Stay safe out there.
See ya.
I don't drive anymore. That's up to the wife. So anyways, take care.
Take care.